It started with a meow so loud, it made the entire police station freeze. Officers backed away, terrified, because the Persian in the corner wasn't just any cat. He was known as the most aggressive police cat in the entire city. His hisses echoed through the precinct, like a warning. Stay away. No handler could calm him. Every attempt failed. Once the most loyal feline on the force, he had turned unpredictable, after losing his handler in a tragic operation. Since then, no one could go near him. He refused food, scratched anyone who came close, and hissed at every human. Officers called him the Beast. But one afternoon, when everyone had given up hope, a tiny girl in a pink dress walked straight toward his cage, smiling. Officers screamed for her to stop. "Please, sweetheart, stay away from that cat." But she ignored every warning. She simply looked into his eyes and whispered, "It's okay. You're not bad." And when her tiny hand touched the aggressive cat, no one dared approach. What happened next shocked everyone. Imagine this. A beast no one could tame, suddenly calmed by a child. Can you picture it? Stay with me, because this story, from Hope Build Your Dream, is about to get even more incredible. Before we continue, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe to Hope Build Your Dream. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The metal gates of the city's feline division rattled as the van rolled in. Inside, caged and muzzled, sat a massive Persian, whose eyes could freeze anyone in place. Officers whispered among themselves. "That's him?" one muttered. "Yeah, that's Rex, the one they call the untouchable." When the handler opened the cage door, Rex didn't move at first. He just stared, his golden eyes sharp, unblinking, filled with something darker than anger, grief. Then, without warning, he lunged forward, the chain jerking tight as the handler stumbled back. Hisses echoed through the concrete hallway. No one dared get closer. Rex had been through 5 precincts in just 2 years. Every officer who tried to train him walked away with scratches, physical and emotional. Reports called him uncontrollable, dangerous, beyond rehabilitation. But none of them mentioned the nights he yowled for someone who would never return. Behind the observation glass, Captain Reynolds folded his arms. "We'll give him one last chance," he said grimly. "But if he snaps again, he's done." The room went silent. Everyone knew what done meant. Rex was led into an isolated kennel at the far end of the facility. Heavy metal doors, reinforced bars. No other cats nearby. He paced in circles, the sound of his paws padding against the floor, like a ticking clock. Each time a handler passed, he hissed low, a warning. The scars across his muzzle told their own story. Once he had been a hero, now he was a ghost of what he used to be. Night fell. The station lights dimmed, leaving the corridor bathed in a cold, sterile glow. From his cage, Rex watched officers laugh, eat, and head home. He pressed his head against the bars, listening. The faint hum of the city outside reminded him of the world he'd lost. Sirens, orders, the comforting voice of his old partner calling his name. But that voice was gone. A sudden flash of thunder outside made him flinch. For a second, his muscles tensed, his mind replaying that terrible night. The explosion, the screams, the silence that followed. He let out a deep, haunting yowl that echoed down the empty hall. Everyone feared Rex for his aggression. But if they looked closer, they'd see the truth. His fury wasn't born from hate. It was born from heartbreak. And no one, not a single soul, had ever dared to reach through that pain. Until one day someone would. Hold on, can you feel the tension building? A cat lost in grief. A precinct on edge. What if I told you, the key to his healing was closer than anyone imagined? Keep listening. Hope Build Your Dream is just getting started. 2 weeks later, the sound of sirens echoed through the early morning fog as a police transport van pulled up outside Riverdale City Precinct. Inside the van, Rex lay caged once again, silent, motionless, eyes fixed on the narrow beam of light coming through the bars. The officer driving glanced at his partner. "You sure about this transfer?" he asked nervously. He's not like the others. The last precinct couldn't handle him. The second officer shrugged uneasily. Orders from the top. Riverdale's got better facilities. If anyone can fix him, maybe they can. When the doors opened, a wave of tense curiosity spread through the station yard. Officers gathered quietly, watching as two handlers in protective gear led Rex out. His thick fur rippled with every movement, muscles tight, head low. The muzzle gleamed under the sunlight, and his hiss was low but constant, like a storm building under his breath. "Stay back," one handler warned. "He doesn't like eye contact." Rex's ears flicked back, scanning the surroundings. Everything here was new. New scents, new sounds, new faces. He didn't trust any of it. The wind carried faint traces of gun oil, coffee, and diesel fuel. All familiar, yet meaningless now. Inside the precinct, Captain Reynolds briefed the team. "This cat's been transferred due to extreme aggression. Last handler suffered serious injuries. You'll observe him, but no one enters the kennel without clearance." A murmur spread through the group. "So why keep him at all?" one rookie whispered. The captain's expression hardened. "Because he's not just a cat. He's the best feline the force ever had, before everything changed." That silence was heavy, the kind that carries respect and fear at the same time. Rex was led into the reinforced holding wing, his paws padding across the polished floor. He caught glimpses of other felines, calm, obedient, their tails swishing as their handlers passed by. They looked at him, some hissing softly, sensing the tension radiating from his body. But Rex didn't react. He had built walls around himself, higher than any cage. As the door clanged shut behind him, he lowered his head and sat in the corner, shadows swallowing his face. Outside, officers exchanged uneasy glances. "He's not a cat," one muttered. "He's a ticking time bomb." No one knew that inside that hardened shell lived a loyal heart, broken, waiting for a reason to trust again. And that reason was already on her way. The morning sun poured through the tall glass windows of Riverdale Precinct, glinting off polished badges and steaming coffee cups. Officer Mark Jensen sat at his desk, flipping through a thin file marked feline transfer. "Rex," his brow furrowed deeper with every page he turned. The words uncontrollable, multiple attacks, handler injury, jumped out at him like warning signs. He closed the file with a sigh. "Not again," he muttered. Mark had spent over a decade working with police cats. He'd trained some of the best, from drug sniffers to bomb detectors, each one loyal and fearless. But he also knew the other side. The ones broken by trauma. The ones too haunted to return to duty. And Rex, from everything he'd read, wasn't just broken. He was lost. Captain Reynolds walked in, his expression tight. "Mark," he said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I need you to assess him." Mark looked up sharply. "Captain, with all due respect, I'm not volunteering for suicide. You've seen his record." "I have," Reynolds replied. "But you're the only handler with enough experience to give him a chance. Everyone else is too scared to even go near that kennel." Mark leaned back in his chair, staring out the window. The city was alive with sirens, but all he could hear was the echo of his own memories. The day his old feline partner, Shadow, had been shot in the line of duty. He'd promised himself he'd never get too close again. Losing a partner once had been hard enough. Losing another, impossible. "Why risk it?" Mark finally said. "He's unpredictable. If he can't be trained, he's dangerous to everyone." Reynolds hesitated. Maybe he's just misunderstood." He paused, lowering his voice. "I've seen cats like him before. Angry, withdrawn, terrified. They don't need control. They need someone who listens." Mark didn't reply. He just stared at the file again, at the picture of Rex baring his teeth through the muzzle, eyes burning with something between rage and pain. He closed the folder and stood. "I'll look at him," he said quietly, "but I'm not making any promises." As he walked down the corridor toward the feline wing, a strange unease settled in his chest. He didn't know it yet, but this encounter would change both their lives forever. The soft hum of fluorescent lights filled the quiet observation room. As Mark stood behind the reinforced glass, watching Rex pace inside his kennel. The cat's movements were sharp, restless. Every step a reflection of the chaos brewing inside him. His eyes flicked toward every sound, every shadow, as if expecting danger to appear at any second. Mark had seen aggression before, but this was different. Rex wasn't just hostile. He was haunted. Where did he come from? Mark asked, turning to Officer Diaz, who was logging notes beside him. Diaz sighed. He's military trained, served overseas, was part of a bomb detection unit with his handler, Sergeant Cole Evans. They were legends, saved an entire convoy once. Mark's gaze returned to Rex. What happened? Diaz hesitated before replying. ID attack. Their vehicle was hit during patrol. Evans didn't make it. Rex survived barely. After that, he stopped responding to commands. Scratched the medics who tried to help. They sent him back home, but every precinct since has failed to reach him. Mark's chest tightened. He knew that kind of loss, the kind that changes you forever. Through the glass, Rex hissed, pacing faster, his tail stiff. He stopped suddenly, eyes locking on Mark, as if sensing he was being discussed. The air felt heavy, electric. Mark didn't flinch. He held Rex's gaze, not in challenge, but in understanding. For a brief second, something flickered in those amber eyes. Confusion, maybe even recognition. Then it was gone, replaced by the same cold fire. Later that evening, as the precinct quieted, Mark found himself reading through old field reports. Photos of Rex and Sergeant Evans covered the file. The two side by side, covered in dust, smiling after a successful mission. The bond between them was unmistakable. One picture showed Evans crouched beside Rex, hand resting on his neck, eyes filled with pride. The caption read, "The perfect team." Mark exhaled slowly. "No wonder he's like this," he whispered. He lost his whole world. In the kennel, Rex lay curled in the corner, head resting on his paws. But his ears twitched, as if he could still hear the faint echoes of his handler's voice. Command shouted over gunfire, the rush of sandstorms, the hum of distant engines. Sometimes in the stillness of night, he would jerk awake, yowling furiously, trapped in memories that refused to fade. To the officers, he was a dangerous animal. But to Mark, he looked like a soldier stuck on a battlefield long after the war had ended. As thunder rumbled outside, Mark placed a hand on the glass. "You don't need to fight anymore," he murmured quietly, though Rex couldn't hear him. "You just need someone to remind you how to live." But he had no idea that soon, the one who would remind Rex wouldn't be him. It would be someone far smaller and far braver. The next morning began with tension thick in the air. Rain pattered softly against the station windows as officers gathered near the feline wing. A new handler, Officer Grant, adjusted his gloves and bulletproof sleeve nervously. "I've handled aggressive cats before," he said, trying to sound confident. "I can manage him." Captain Reynolds gave a slow nod. "Be careful. This isn't just any cat." Behind the reinforced door, Rex stood alert, ears high, tail stiff. He sensed the movement outside long before anyone entered. The instant the door creaked open, his body tensed like a coiled spring. Grant stepped forward with a leash and calm voice. "Easy boy," he murmured. "No one's going to hurt you." Rex's gaze locked on him, unblinking, predatory, testing. The room fell silent, except for the faint pad of Grant's boots against the floor. Each step felt like a countdown. "Stay ready," whispered an officer behind the safety glass. Grant stopped a few feet away, crouching slowly. "Good boy," he said softly. "We're going to be friends." He extended a gloved hand, trembling slightly. That was the mistake. Rex lunged. The sound of metal chains snapped through the air, his claws clashing against the muzzle with a violent hiss that rattled the walls. Grant stumbled backward, his sleeve tearing under the force, as officers shouted and slammed the cage shut. Rex yowled ferociously, muscles straining, eyes wild with terror more than rage. The hallway erupted in chaos. "Get him out. Get him out now," someone yelled. Mark rushed in. As the handlers pulled Grant away, his arm bleeding where the sleeve had failed. "I told you not to push him," Mark barked angrily. "He's not ready for this." Grant, pale and shaken, muttered, "That thing's not a cat. He's a monster." But Mark looked through the cage bars and saw something else. Beneath Rex's hiss there was fear, a deep, trembling fear. His chest heaved, eyes darting between faces, as if expecting another explosion, another command, another loss. The captain's voice cut through the noise. "That's it. We're done. If no one can control him by the end of the week, I'll have to authorize termination." The words hit Mark like a stone. He stared at Rex, still trembling inside his cage, and felt a pang in his chest. He didn't know why, but something told him the story wasn't over. Somewhere inside that broken creature, a spark was still alive. It just needed the right soul to reach it. And that soul was about to walk through the precinct doors. It was a quiet Saturday morning at the precinct. The kind of morning when paperwork piled high, coffee ran cold, and the world outside moved slower than usual. Rain clouds hung low, and the steady hum of fluorescent lights filled the hallways. No one expected anything unusual. That changed when the front doors opened. A woman stepped inside, holding a small hand. She was in her early 30s, wearing a faded denim jacket, her eyes tired but kind. Beside her, a little girl about 6 years old clutched a worn-out teddy bear and looked around with wide, curious eyes. "Can I help you, ma'am?" the desk officer asked. "Yes," the woman replied softly.
I'm Emily Carter.
"My husband was a police officer here before he passed. I just wanted to show my daughter where her father used to work." The officer nodded sympathetically. "Of course, Mrs. Carter. I'm sorry for your loss." While the adult spoke, the little girl, Lily, wandered a few steps away. Her tiny shoes squeaked on the floor as she peeked down the hallway where the feline unit was housed. She tilted her head, hearing faint sounds of yowling echoing from behind thick steel doors. "Mommy," she whispered, tugging Emily's sleeve. "Are there cats here?" Emily smiled faintly. "Yes, sweetheart. Police cats, but we can't go in there." "Okay." Lily nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on that hallway. At that same moment, Mark was inside the feline wing, standing by Rex's kennel. The cat lay in the corner, unmoving, eyes dull and distant. The air was heavy with silence, until suddenly Rex's ears twitched. His head lifted, nose flaring. Something had changed. He stood abruptly, staring toward the door. His body went rigid, muscles tightening, but his hiss didn't come. Instead, a low purr escaped his throat. Mark frowned. "What is it, boy?" Then, through the narrow glass panel in the door, he saw her. A little girl standing just outside, her pink dress a bright contrast to the gray hallway. Her curious eyes met Rex's from afar. Before anyone could react, she took a step forward. "Wait!" Mark shouted, rushing toward the door. But Lily was already walking closer, her small hand reaching for the handle. Rex didn't move. He simply watched her, his eyes locked on hers, not with anger this time, but with something no one had seen before. Something soft, something familiar. And in that single silent moment, the story of an untouchable cat began to change forever. The hallway fell silent, as Lily's tiny hand pressed against the cold metal door. Mark froze mid-step, his heart leaping to his throat. "No, don't open that," he shouted, his boots echoing down the corridor. But the child didn't flinch. She turned her head slightly, eyes innocent and unafraid. "It's okay," she said softly, almost to herself. "He's not bad." The handle clicked. The heavy door creaked open. Every officer nearby tensed. One wrong move, one sudden sound, and the cat behind that door could turn deadly in a heartbeat. Mark lunged forward, but he was too late. Lily had already stepped inside. The air changed instantly. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly as Rex lifted his head, his amber eyes fixed on the tiny figure before him. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Mark held his breath. Rex's posture was rigid, muscles coiled, ears forward, the unmistakable stance before a strike. The sound of his low hiss rumbled deep in his chest, vibrating through the concrete floor. Lily. Emily's voice cracked from the hallway, her footsteps racing closer. But the little girl didn't run. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, clutching her teddy bear, eyes wide but calm. "Hi," she whispered softly. Rex blinked. The hiss faltered, his head tilted slightly, confusion flickering in his eyes. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not since his old handler. That gentle tone, that innocent trust. It didn't belong in this place of fear. Mark stopped at the threshold, his hand gripping the door frame, ready to intervene. He knew one wrong sound could trigger an attack. Every instinct screamed at him to pull her back. Yet something stopped him. Rex wasn't lunging. He was listening. Lily took another step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay, kitty. I know you're sad." The words hung in the air, like a fragile thread connecting two broken worlds. Rex's breathing slowed. The tension in his shoulders eased just a little. The beast everyone feared stood perfectly still, caught between the instinct to defend and the desperate need to remember what kindness felt like. Mark didn't move. Neither did Rex. The whole room held its breath. For the first time in years, someone had looked into the eyes of the untouchable cat and saw not a monster, but a soul. The air inside the kennel felt heavy, thick with fear and disbelief. Officers crowded behind the glass, frozen in silence. No one dared to move or even breathe too loudly. All eyes were on the little girl standing just a few feet away from the most feared cat in the precinct. Rex's muscles were tense, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. His ears twitched, nostrils flaring, as he studied the tiny human before him. Every instinct screamed at him to stay guarded. Yet, something about her presence made him hesitate. Lily took one small step closer. Her shoes made a soft squeak against the tiled floor. She tilted her head, her voice trembling but kind. "You're not bad," she whispered. "You're just scared, huh?" Rex blinked, confused. No shouting, no orders, no fear, just a soft voice, gentle like the one he remembered from long ago. From behind the glass, Mark's pulse pounded in his ears. He wanted to rush in to pull the girl away, but something stopped him. Rex's posture had changed. The sharpness in his eyes was fading, replaced by something uncertain, almost childlike. Lily crouched slowly, setting her teddy bear on the ground. "See," she said, pushing it forward a little. "He's nice too. You can smell him if you want." Rex tilted his head again. His tail twitched slightly, not in aggression, but in confusion. Then, slowly, cautiously, he took a single step forward. His paws patted against the floor. The muzzle's metal glinted under the light. The entire station held its breath. Lily smiled. "Good boy." She reached out, her small hand trembling, and pressed it gently against the cold steel bars. Rex froze. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then he lowered his head. With a quiet, shaky breath, he pressed his nose against her fingers. A faint purr escaped his throat. A sound so soft, so fragile, it broke through every barrier between them. Gasps erupted behind the glass. Mark's eyes widened. The beast who had terrified everyone just allowed a child to touch him. Rex closed his eyes for a moment, as if surrendering to a memory. A touch he thought he'd never feel again. And from that second on, something inside him began to heal. No one spoke for several seconds after that moment. The officers who had crowded behind the glass stood frozen, eyes wide in disbelief. The room that had always echoed with hisses and warnings was now wrapped in silence. The kind of silence that carried awe. Mark slowly exhaled, still staring through the reinforced window. This isn't possible," he murmured. Inside the kennel, Lily giggled softly, her small fingers still resting on Rex's muzzle. The massive cat who had once lunged at grown men now stood still as a stone, except for the faint swish of his tail. It was subtle, hesitant, as if he wasn't sure he was allowed to show peace again. "Lily." Emily's voice cracked through the moment, as she finally reached the door. Panic etched across her face. "Sweetheart, step back. That's a dangerous cat." Lily turned and smiled brightly. No, Mommy. He's not dangerous. He's sad. Emily froze. Her breath hitched. As she saw the creature everyone feared standing quietly in front of her child, eyes softer than she could ever imagine. Mark opened the door slowly, his hand hovering near his tranquilizer just in case. Easy girl, he said gently, gesturing to Emily. Don't make any sudden moves. But Rex didn't even glance at him. His gaze was fixed entirely on Lily. When the girl turned to leave, Rex let out a soft, pleading meow, a sound that sent chills through the room. It wasn't aggression. It was longing. Mark noticed it instantly. He doesn't want her to go, he whispered. That afternoon, after Emily and Lily left, Mark stayed behind in the observation room, reviewing the security footage. He watched the moment again and again. The way Rex froze, the way his eyes changed, the way he lowered his head. He'd trained dozens of felines and studied countless behavioral cases, but he had never seen anything like this. Rex hadn't reacted to Lily like a handler or a stranger. He had reacted like he recognized her. Mark leaned closer to the screen, pausing the footage at the moment Rex pressed his muzzle against the girl's fingers. His breath caught. There was something unmistakable in his eyes. Pain and love tangled together. He whispered under his breath, "What did you see in her, boy?" For the first time since Rex had arrived, Mark felt something shift. This wasn't a case to be solved. It was a mystery written in the language of the heart. And deep down he knew he had to let them meet again. The next morning, the precinct buzzed with whispers. The story of the little girl who touched the untouchable cat spread like wildfire. Officers replayed the footage again and again, each time shaking their heads in disbelief. Some called it a miracle. Others said it was luck. But Mark knew it was something deeper. He couldn't shake the image of Rex's eyes when Lily left, that look of sorrow like he'd lost something precious all over again. Against all protocol, Mark made a decision. "Let her come back," he told Captain Reynolds. The captain stared at him. "You're out of your mind." That child was inches away from losing her hand. "I know," Mark said firmly. "But she didn't. He trusts her. If there's even a chance this can calm him, we have to try." After a long pause, Reynolds sighed. One visit under supervision. By afternoon, Emily and Lily returned. The moment Rex saw her, everything changed. His ears perked, his tail lifted slightly, and for the first time in months, his eyes looked alive. Emily held her daughter's hand tightly. "Sweetheart, remember what we talked about, gentle and slow?" Lily nodded, walking closer to the kennel. "Hi, Rex," she said softly, as if greeting an old friend. "I missed you." The giant cat tilted his head, a faint purr rumbling from his throat. When she crouched near the bars again, he pressed his muzzle forward instantly, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Good boy," Lily whispered, running her fingers through the spaces of the steel door. Mark watched, amazed. Each visit grew easier. Within days, Rex began responding not just to Lily's voice, but to commands. When she said, "Sit," he obeyed. When she smiled, his tail swished against the floor. He started eating regularly, sleeping calmly, and hissing less. The violent tension that once defined him slowly began to melt away. Other officers noticed, too. "You won't believe it," Diaz said one evening. "He actually purred when I passed by. Thought I was seeing things." Mark chuckled quietly, though his eyes stayed on Rex. He's remembering what it means to trust again. That week, Lily visited every day after school. She brought small drawings, crayon sketches of her mom and Rex standing together under a bright yellow sun. She taped them near his kennel. Each time Rex would stare at them for minutes like he understood. Emily often stood in the corner, hand pressed to her heart, tears glistening in her eyes. "I've never seen anything like this," she whispered. Mark nodded. "Neither have I." What no one knew was that Rex's transformation had just begun. Beneath the surface of this fragile bond, something deeper was stirring. A connection written in fate, one that would soon uncover a truth none of them could have imagined. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between Lily and Rex grew stronger than anyone could explain. The once feral police cat now waited by the gate every morning, ears alert, tail tapping the ground in quiet rhythm. The moment the little girl's footsteps echoed down the corridor, his entire demeanor softened. Mark couldn't deny it. Rex was healing. But something about their connection nagged at him. There was a familiarity in the way the cat looked at her, as though he already knew her from another life. One evening, long after the precinct had emptied, Mark sat in his office, flipping through Rex's old military records again. The file was thick, faded from years of transfers. Most of it was routine mission logs, behavioral notes, commendations. But buried in the back was a folded photograph. He unfolded it carefully. It was a picture of Sergeant Cole Evans kneeling beside a younger, brighter-eyed Rex. Standing next to them was a woman holding a toddler with pigtails in the same bright smile that now lit up the precinct every afternoon. Mark's heart stopped. He turned the photo over. On the back, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "Rex, Daddy's brave partner. Love, Lily." The world seemed to freeze. The little girl who had calmed the most dangerous cat on the force was the daughter of his fallen handler. Mark leaned back in his chair, the weight of realization pressing down on him. All the pieces fell into place. Rex's confusion, his purrs, the instant bond. He hadn't just recognized her scent or her voice. He had remembered his family. The next morning, Mark found Emily waiting in the lobby as usual. He hesitated, then asked gently, "Ma'am, did your husband ever serve with the feline unit?" Her eyes softened, sadness flickering within them. "Yes, Cole Evans. He died overseas." Mark exhaled shakily. "Your husband's partner was Rex." Emily froze, her lips parting in disbelief. "That cat was his?" Mark nodded. "He never forgot. That's why he trusted your daughter from the start." Tears filled Emily's eyes as she looked toward the hallway. At that very moment, Lily was kneeling by the kennel, giggling softly while Rex pressed his head against the bars. Emily whispered, voice trembling, "He remembers us." And for the first time in years, Rex lifted his eyes, not in fear, not in pain, but in recognition of the only family he had left. That night, the city was swallowed by a violent storm. Rain hammered against rooftops. Wind howled through empty streets, and thunder rolled like distant explosions. The storm sirens echoed across Riverdale, warning citizens to stay indoors. But at the precinct, one heart hadn't learned to rest easy. Rex's. The first crack of thunder jolted him awake. His ears shot up, his body trembling. Lightning flashed across the sky, painting the walls in white bursts of light. The sound dragged him back into a memory. The desert, the explosion, his handler's scream. He began pacing, panting, meowing softly, his paws scraping the floor. Officer Diaz, working the night shift, noticed through the security camera. Mark," he called over the intercom. "Your boy's losing it in there." Mark, already on his way, grabbed his jacket. "It's the storm," he muttered. "He can't handle loud noises." Trauma response. But before Mark could reach the feline wing, another flash of lightning hit close. The thunderclap that followed was deafening. Startled beyond reason, Rex lunged at the kennel door. The bolt holding it gave way under his immense strength, and the door swung open. Within seconds, he was gone, a blur of fur and fear into the storm. By the time Mark reached the empty cage, rainwater was already blowing in through the open hallway door. "Damn it, Rex!" he shouted, running into the night. Meanwhile, across town, Emily and Lily were driving home from a late grocery run when their car stalled near an old bridge. The rain came down in sheets. Emily tried the ignition again. "Nothing. We'll wait it out," she said, forcing calm into her voice. But Lily stared out the fogged window, eyes wide. "Mommy," she whispered. "Rex, he's outside." Emily blinked. "Sweetheart, that's just the storm." But before she could finish, a dark shape appeared in the flashing light. A massive Persian, drenched, panting, eyes wild with confusion. Rex stood in the middle of the road, looking straight at their car. Rex, Emily breathed. The cat meowed once, sharp, urgent, and then turned, running toward the nearby woods. Lily pressed her hands to the glass. He wants us to follow. Emily hesitated. Lily, no. But the little girl had already opened the car door and dashed into the rain. Lily, Emily screamed, chasing after her. The ground was slick and uneven. Lightning flickered overhead as Lily disappeared behind a row of fallen trees. Rex, her voice echoed faintly through the storm. Mark's police radio crackled, just as he reached the main road. Report of a child missing near the East Bridge. Possible connection to runaway feline. His blood ran cold. He slammed his foot on the gas. Somewhere out there, a terrified little girl and a broken cat had run straight into the heart of the storm, and fate was about to test their bond like never before. The storm raged with unrelenting fury. Trees bent under the weight of the wind, and flashes of lightning tore open the sky. Mark's police cruiser sped through flooded streets, tires slicing through water, as the radio crackled with static. This is Officer Jensen. I'm en route to the East Bridge. We've got a missing child and a feline on the loose. His voice was tight, heart hammering in his chest. Copy that, the dispatcher replied. Be advised. Road collapse reported near the forest line. Proceed with caution. Mark gritted his teeth and pressed harder on the gas. Hold on, Rex. Don't do anything stupid. Meanwhile, deep in the woods, Lily stumbled through the mud, rain soaking her pink dress. Rex, she cried, her small voice trembling. Where are you? A sharp meow answered from the distance, faint but clear. Lily followed the sound, slipping, falling, then pushing herself up again. When she reached a clearing, she finally saw him, standing tall against the storm, drenched and shaking, but alive. Rex, she shouted in relief. The Persian meowed again and bounded toward her. She threw her arms around his neck without hesitation. You found me. But Rex wasn't calm. His ears twitched, his body tense. He meowed sharply again, facing the direction behind her. Lightning flashed, and that's when she saw it. A fallen tree teetering dangerously over the small slope where she stood. Before she could react, the earth beneath her feet gave way. The muddy ground collapsed, pulling her down toward the ravine below. She screamed, but before she hit the bottom, Rex lunged forward. He caught the back of her jacket in his jaws and dug his claws deep into the ground, hissing through the strain. Rain poured into his eyes. Mud splattered across his face, but he refused to let go. Inch by inch, he pulled her up, his muscles trembling, paws slipping on the wet ground. Hold on, boy, Lily gasped, clutching his fur. With one final heave, Rex yanked her to safety, just as the massive tree crashed down behind them, splintering the earth. The explosion of thunder echoed through the valley. Lily lay still, panting, her tiny hands gripping Rex's collar. You saved me, she whispered, but Rex didn't move right away. He stood over her, chest heaving, ears pinned back. A deep cut ran along his side. The tree had grazed him when it fell. Blood mingled with the rain. Moments later, Mark burst through the trees, flashlight beams slicing through the dark. Lily, he shouted, voice breaking with panic. Here, she cried weakly. Rex saved me. Mark knelt beside them, pulling the trembling girl into his arms. Then his eyes fell on Rex, bleeding, limping, but still standing protectively over her. Good boy, Mark whispered, his throat tight. You did it. Rex looked up at him, eyes clouded but calm, as if saying, she's safe now. Then he collapsed into the mud, his body finally giving out. Hang on, buddy, Mark said, lifting him with trembling arms. We're not losing you tonight. As the storm began to fade, the sirens grew louder in the distance. Under the flashing red lights, a broken soldier and a little girl were carried back toward safety, bound forever by a love that defied fear, pain, and fate itself. The steady hum of machines filled the hospital corridor. The storm had passed, leaving behind silence, one that strange, heavy kind of quiet that follows chaos. The clock on the wall ticked slowly as Mark sat outside the emergency room, drenched and shivering, his hands clasped together. Across from him, Emily held Lily close, her eyes red from crying. Rex had been rushed into surgery minutes after arriving. His side was torn open and he'd lost a lot of blood. The doctor said they'd do everything they could, but Mark knew the odds weren't good. "Mommy," Lily whispered, her voice small and shaky. "He's gonna be okay, right?" Emily brushed a tear from her daughter's cheek. "He's strong, sweetheart. He saved you. He won't give up now." Mark turned away, jaw clenched, fighting back emotion. He'd seen heroes fall before, both human and feline. But this one was different. This one had found his reason to live again. And Mark couldn't bear the thought of losing him now. Hours passed. The door finally opened, and a tired-looking veterinarian in scrubs stepped out. "He's stable," she said, her voice gentle but cautious. "The wound was deep, but he's a fighter. He's resting now." Lily shot to her feet, eyes wide with hope. "Can I see him?" The vet hesitated, then smiled softly, just for a minute. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and wet fur. Machines beeped softly beside the table where Rex lay, wrapped in bandages, breathing slow and steady. His fur was shaved around the wound, and an 4-line ran down to his paw. Lily walked up quietly, her tiny hands trembling. "Hey, boy," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's me." Rex's ear twitched. Then his eyes fluttered open, hazy at first, then clear. The moment he saw her, his tail gave a weak swish against the bed. Mark and Emily stood in the doorway, tears glistening in their eyes, as Lily leaned close and hugged Rex gently around the neck. "You came back," she whispered, "just like Daddy always said you would." Rex gave a soft purr, pressing his head against her shoulder. It was the same sound he'd made years ago, the one Cole Evans used to calm him during long nights overseas. Emily covered her mouth, her voice trembling. "He remembers." Mark's throat tightened. He never forgot. The storm had taken its toll. But what it left behind was something unbreakable. The reunion of two souls bound by love, memory, and fate. As the rain cleared outside and sunlight crept through the window, Rex drifted back to sleep, not in fear this time, but in peace, knowing his family had finally found him again. 2 months later, the world looked very different. The snow had begun to fall gently over Riverdale, blanketing the streets in soft white. The precinct courtyard, once echoing with the sounds of yowling and orders, now carried a quiet warmth. A small crowd of officers gathered near the flagpole, their uniforms crisp, their expressions proud. At the center stood Mark, Emily, and little Lily, and beside them, wearing a polished silver badge on his new collar, was Rex. The once feared untouchable feline stood tall, his fur shining, eyes calm and alert. There was no trace of the monster people had whispered about. Instead, there stood a hero, one who had fought not only danger, but his own pain. Captain Reynolds stepped forward, his voice steady, but full of emotion. "Today, we honor a soldier who reminded us what loyalty truly means. Rex, for bravery beyond duty, and for saving a child's life, we hereby name you an honorary officer of Riverdale Police Department." Applause broke through the winter air. Lily clapped the loudest, her small hands glowing red from the cold. "That's my Rex," she said proudly, her laughter cutting through the crisp morning like sunlight. Mark smiled, his eyes misty. He knelt beside Rex, scratching behind his ear. "You did it, buddy," he murmured. "You finally found home again." Rex tilted his head, then looked toward Emily and Lily, his new family, before pressing his nose against Mark's palm in quiet gratitude. After the ceremony, the crowd began to disperse. Snowflakes drifted lazily down, melting on Rex's warm fur. Lily ran circles around him, giggling as he followed her with careful steps, his tail swishing gently. Emily stood back, hands in her coat pockets, watching the two play. Mark joined her. "You know," he said softly, "I think your husband would have been proud." Rex never stopped waiting for him. Emily smiled through her tears. Maybe he wasn't waiting. Maybe he was just waiting for us. They stood there in silence for a while. The kind of silence that felt full, not empty. As evening fell, the sky turned gold and pink. Lily sat beside Rex on the station steps, leaning against him, her tiny fingers buried in his fur. The badge on his collar caught the last rays of the sunset, gleaming like a medal of honor. Mark watched them from the doorway, his heart finally at peace. For years, Rex had carried the ghosts of his past. But now, surrounded by love and laughter, he had found what every soldier longs for after the fight, a reason to live again. Rex lifted his head toward the horizon, ears perked, eyes bright. For the first time in years, his world wasn't filled with thunder or fear, only peace. And beside him, the little girl who healed his broken heart whispered, "Welcome home, Rex. This has been a Hope Build Your Dream production. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today."